Fatale. That's the end of the video. That's it. Please be sure to like and subscribe. That's your answer. But to go seriously, okay, if you want to keep watching, then by all means, because there's a little big case of scenarios, but that's your answer. You're welcome. I like to be straightforward. There we go. Moving along. So which fixer do you want to use? That is your question, right? That's why you clicked on this. Which fixer should you be using? Well, the game has changed a little bit. The way that things have gone have changed a little bit. So you can use different fixes now. But we'll just kind of go on the base route of things. Here you'll see all the fixes that we have for the weapons. Attack, you have Termina, you have Fatale, you have Wix, Unwix. Blastor, you have Abandac. Those are the fixes that you have for the weapons. Now, Blastor is very unique in itself because it's really just increasing your photon blast power. This is a good option if you have a weapon that you're swapping out. So pretty much now, because of the availability of where they're making these weapons more available, it allows us, instead of chasing the weapon necessarily itself, you're chasing different combinations of gameplay, which is actually a neat way to go about it. So like Blastor, for example, adds photon blast damage, right? So this is a good option if you're just swapping, using your photon blast. Say you're using a ray, and then you're swapping to a flugel for your photon blast to get the buff effect, and you have a blaster on that, so it's outputting more damage as well. So this is a great option for that. This is a super great option for that if you have a Blastor. Whereas across the board, generally you're going to want Fatale. The way that Fatale has been modified is very huge now. So generally you're going to want a Fatale where it goes at 22% at level 5 on that crit rate boost. That's pretty much going to work across the board for every class. Now, of course, there's an exception, mainly with Slayer and Termina. Termina is by far, as it always has been, the option that you want for Slayer. Fatale does not compete with Termina when it comes to Slayer class, period. It does not. Does not, so, like, by a landslide, because Slayer already has that inherent crit rate boost that it gets from its class alone. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about that at all. Termina is the only thing you should have for Slayer. I wouldn't even, with how strong Termina is on Slayer, I wouldn't even go as far as saying to even have like a Blaster. Just do everything with the Termina, dude. It's very straightforward with Slayer. Termina is that strong on Slayer in specific. Even more so than the Wix on weak points. And that's where we'll go next. Wix is the other option, especially outside Fatale, for pretty much every class. Wix is super strong on weak points. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about Wix, this also applies to elements. So when you're matching the element, that counts as a weak point. So for Techer, for Force, these are classes that have elements, and you're matching the element. That counts as a weak point as well. So keep that in mind, of course, on top of the obvious weak bullet from Ranger. So Wix is a great option, the #1 option for Ranger, because you're a Ranger. You're going to have a weak bullet up at all times. If you don't have your weak bullet up at all times, you need to learn how to play Ranger, because there's no point in playing Ranger if you don't have your weak bullet up. Period. Period. Okay. So in that way, Wix is going to be the best one in that case scenario. Now, pretty much for every other class, Fatale. That's your simple answer, as I stated at the beginning of the video. That's your simple answer for everything else pretty much out there. Is going to be Fatale. Keep in mind that attack is there and Abandac is there. However, all these fixes have been scaled to be a bit closer of a window than they were before. So regardless of which one you pick, they're all, a little bit nicely packed, right? So attack is still good as well, if you have that. Of course, like I said, Fatale is going to be the better option in most case scenarios, but attack is still good. Unwix can be good for solo play if you're not a Ranger. Unwix, what Unwix does is it gives you increased damage to non-weak points, whereas Wix gives you increased damage to weak points, right? So this gives you increased damage to non-weak points. So for classes that are soloing and don't have, weak point, so elements or weak bullet, then unwits can be good as an option to use. However, if you're in party play, generally that's not going to really be a good option because you're generally going to have a ranger, or you're going to be fighting something that has a whole lot of weak points. You're fighting a boss that has constant weak points on it. If you're hitting blue numbers, that's a weak point, by the way. If it's blue numbers, it's a weak point. That's how that works. If you're not clear about that, which hopefully you are. So that's how you want to go about that one. Abandac is more or less dead. It's not worth its struggle, its nuisancy. It's not worth the trouble of building an Abandac, because while Abandac is still good, you have to build it with all these different types of augments in order to actually get it to be at its maximum power. Because of this, it makes it not really a viable option. However, if you're if it's kind of just what you ended up rolling in your, maybe, I think it actually kind of better suits now newer players, because newer players may not be able to have all these augments, and they might be just tossing on augments and stuff like that. And so this still allows you to gain some power by doing that and not having the proper augments, right? So I think it actually kind of benefits newer players a bit better. But for the most part, try to avoid Abandac if you can, because it's a money sink, and it's not worth it really anymore to do that because of the complexity of building it. Just as it's a pain in the rear. But it's a good option if you have that freedom to do so, because like I said, Abandac requires unique augments, so you can't have the same augment. So like normally you would have, like say you have 3 Gigas Mastays, that would not count. You can only have 1 Gigas Mastay, then you can have a Gigas Mastay S and a Gigas Mastay LC. Those kind of 3 different ones, but you can't have just straight, Gigas Mastay, Gigas Mastay, Gigas Mastay. It will only count as 1. So that makes things very difficult, and that goes across the board for everything that you're putting on. So that goes across the board. So that makes it very difficult to gear Abandac. Makes it very troublesome to do so. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. But as you can see, the way that they have it set up now, it creates very much a route where you can have multiple weapons for multiple situations. So like for me currently right now, I'm using a Wix, and then I have a weapon outside that Wix that I use, right? If there's not weak points. So that way my damage stays up, right? That's what you want to do, stuff like that. And that's how you'll best maximize your weapons and your playstyle that you can really bounce around with. So instead of chasing the weapon, you're kind of chasing these different playstyles to maximize how you can really play. Moving on to the armors, this is pretty much up to you. I always say the armors are more so just really suiting your playstyle. They don't have as big of an impact as the weapon fixes do. Like the armors really are just like, like which one really suits your playstyle. So these are the Fixa units, as you can see here: Enthusia, Natra, Performa, Guard, Orchesis, and Increza, right? So the one I pretty much like is Performa. I like Performa very much a lot. I think it's the best one for me, for my playstyle, because it reduces your PP consumption. So I do like to have those. Enthusia is also very good at offensive PP recovery. And Guard, a lot of people like to do Guard because it's damage resistance, which is completely understandable. If you're getting hit, if you want to make sure that you're always staying alive, Guard's a great option. So it's really just suits your playstyle with this ones. Orgesis and Increza, really you get these are really good ones that really you get the benefit in long fights. In short fights, and I've talked about this before, in short fights, you're not going to get that benefit as much because you're not releasing your photon blast, right? So what these two are doing are increasing your photon blast usage rates. So in a long fight, let's say Billy Jane gets 2 photon blasts off. If you have 3 of those across the board, or Jesus and Kreza, then maybe you're getting 4 photon blasts in that same amount of time that they're getting 2, or something of the sort in a long fight. However, in a short fight, this is negligent. It's not going to do anything for you. You'd be better off having a different Fixa, correct? So it's really just situational. Currently, I have 1 Orgesis, and I like to do 2 Performance. That's what I personally like to do. I'm a gunner and a slayer. So that's personally what I like to do for mine. However, I would not necessarily recommend that for everyone else. Like Natra. Force is pretty much the only class that really benefits from Natra recovery, from Natra Fixa. Other classes don't really benefit from that, right? So it's entirely up to you ultimately at the end of the day. So it's entirely up to you. But those are the armor fixes. So just remember that for the armors, for the units. It's really just personal preference. Don't worry too much about those outside of just like, okay, this I think would suit me best, right? Whereas the weapons, actually look into those because those do matter. You know, it's like they make a very big difference on the end result, right? A very big difference. Whereas the units are just personal preference. They're all luxuries. Get the weapon first. But now, with how they increase the drop rates, we don't really have to worry about getting the weapon. We're getting the weapons. So now we just have to gear them. We have to put some variants in there to add to the little element of gameplay that we have here, right? So hopefully that helped. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I will get back to them as soon as I can, my earliest convenience. So please be sure to like and subscribe. And I will see y'all in the next one. Holla. Spike content.